Welcome to the Capital News. I am your host, Alex Karitis. Today is May 28th, 2019. Thank you so much for joining me. So today we're going to discuss the European elections. Obviously, yesterday here in the U.S., it was Memorial Day. I was able to get on and give a podcast and provide that last update to my letter to the president and some of the follow-up that took place on Facebook. But today we're going to get into the other side of the pond and talk about the European Union elections. Now, obviously here we had been forecasting I don't want to use the word revolt, but a populist uprising, a higher total of Eurosceptics to enter European Parliament. While there were some noted victories by the Eurosceptics or the populists, however you want to name them, it was not as sweeping as we had forecasted here. A little bit disappointed on my part, but nevertheless, a rising share of populists entering the European Parliament. Now, I am more of a Eurosceptic, obviously from this side of the pond, but if I was over there, I would be as well. I strongly believe that, because I don't believe that the European Union is a good political model, nor do I believe that it is a good economic model. It is not the same thing as the United States of America. That is sort of what the European Union was trying to attempt and is trying to attempt. However, given the histories of all of these nations throughout the centuries, it's not the same thing as the United States of America. We were not formed. We were just a landmass, and we grew over time. This is a completely different story when it comes to Europe as a whole. Again, there's history, there's culture, there's still some bad blood against different countries. Maybe it's good on paper, maybe it's good in theory, but in practice, it is not the best solution. These countries should be able to work with each other without being in a political and economic union. They should be able to trade with one another as they see fit. They should be able to travel to each other's countries as they see fit. Now, of course, again, on paper, you have this bureaucracy, you have this European Union, you think you can streamline a lot of things, but in fact, that is not the case, which is usually the case when government involves itself. It becomes over budget. It becomes inefficient, it becomes ineffective, it's wasteful, it's just a whole host of bad things. Now, of course, people become used to living in that type of system, and so you have a lot of people throughout Europe, throughout the European Union, who are saying, no, we're fine with it. Yeah, it needs some tweaks here and there, of course, as does everything, but nevertheless, we want to remain here. We think the European Union is a good experiment, tweak some things, but let's continue down the road. And obviously, counter that, you have the Eurosceptics, you have the populists. They're saying, no, enough's enough. We want our sovereignty back as individual nation states, and we want to chart our own political and economic future. If we like you in Germany, we'll trade with you. If we like you in the UK, we'll trade with you. We'll travel. We'll do all of these great things. But we don't need to be under one umbrella. We do not need to be managed and or governed by a whole bunch of no-faced bureaucrats out of the European Parliament. We just don't need it. So if that's going to be the case, then we are going to send as many Eurosceptics and as many populists as we can to the Parliament. Now, again, I was hoping that was going to be a bigger slice of the pie this time around. Unfortunately, that's not the case, but nevertheless, there is a rising share of Eurosceptics in the EU Parliament, which I think is a good thing. I honestly do. So we will see what happens. But here are a few headlines I want to discuss, and then there's a couple articles I'm also going to get into to just provide some further color on what took place over last week. So we have the European Union telling Britain there will be no renegotiation of the Brexit deal. That's it, Fort Pitt. No more. What we've done today is it. So you got to do what you got to do in British Parliament, but we're done here in the European Union. We predicted this was going to happen. We thought this was going to happen. Now, could this change? It absolutely can. It can most definitely change because it has changed before. 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strikes, you're out. Now they're saying, okay, that's it. No more. Will there be a 4th strike? It could happen. Most definitely could happen. But I don't anticipate that it will unless there is some really dire economic or political news or event that comes out and they have to turn on a dime. But they're playing hardball. They want a resolution. They want this thing to be final. You voted in your referendum in 2016 to leave. Now they have to deal with all of these Eurosceptics. Now they have to deal with all of these populists. And so the upper echelons of the EU bureaucracy are getting nervous, which we've had this conversation for the past couple of months here on this podcast. They are nervous because they are going to have new members from across the continent coming into EU Parliament that are going to cause a ruckus. We talk about Nigel Farage here all the time, when we're going to talk about him more here shortly. But that's just from the UK. The Brits are supposed to leave. But now there are more Nigel Farages going to the EU Parliament. They do not like this man. They have not liked him for 20 years because he has been talking about Brexit for 20 years. He finally got his wish 3 years ago. And now that's up in the air. And because of all of the back and forth, all of the shenanigans that has taken place in the British Parliament, now you have Nigel Farage back in action and starting the Brexit Party. And we're going to get to that shortly. But here again, we have the EU telling Britain there will be no renegotiation of the Brexit deal. So that's another interesting twist in this story. European Union leaders agree to pick new Mr. or Ms. Europe next month. So President Jean-Claude Juncker right now, his term is set to expire at the end of this year. Very convenient for him. He can sort of wash his hands of all of the Brexit mess because we have that can kicked down the road with our new hard exit date for October 31st on Halloween. But very shortly thereafter, President Juncker will be gone. He can go retire or he can go mess with somebody else. That's what he will end up doing. But nevertheless, it is now incumbent upon EU to pick the next Mr. or Ms. Europe. Who will it be? We have no idea, but it's going to be interesting because they are going to set the course for quite some time. And they're going to have to do it with a whole host of Eurosceptics and populists to contend with. So, is it going to be Angela Merkel of Germany, Chancellor of Germany? Is she going to switch roles and become basically the Queen of Europe for a little bit? I hope that doesn't take place, but maybe it will. Supposedly, there's already some arguments between Angela Merkel of Germany and Emmanuel Macron of France. So those two are pretty much the darlings of the European Union because they're some of the largest economies, some of the largest countries within the European Union. And so they sort of been allies sticking together to sort of get everybody in the same room and on the same page. So it's interesting to see right now because everybody's sort of reaching for power to get his or her gal or guy in there to become the next quote-unquote king or queen of Europe for a little while. So we're going to have to see how this plays out because, again, they have to contend with a lot of Eurosceptics and populists in Parliament. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. We also have British Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn set to back a second Brexit referendum. No surprise here, folks. We've been talking about this for quite a while. This guy has been going back and forth. I always told you this guy just didn't seem right to me. He might say some of the right things, and he didn't really, but he never really called out officially for a second referendum. Now there are some mumblings that he is going to do so. We'll see if that takes place, but those are the mumblings right now that Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party in the UK, is set to call for a second Brexit referendum. Again, also another thing that we have been stating here for months is if this does take place, there needs to be a revolution in the UK. One of the main reasons, and I reiterate this here all the time because I want to make this crystal clear to everybody, despite how interesting it is from a political standpoint, despite how interesting it is from an economic standpoint, Brexit to me is really more about the sanctity of our institutions, the importance of democracy, and fulfilling the wish and the will of the people. They had a referendum in 2016. They voted to leave. You didn't like it? Too bad. You can leave. You can stay and deal with it. Those are pretty much your options. But the people voted. If you didn't want them to vote, then you shouldn't have put it to a referendum. If you were so certain that everybody was going to say, well, we love the European Union, they're never going to leave, let's just do it anyway, well, shame on you. Shame on you, because the people voted in June of 2016, already 3 years ago, They wanted to leave. So now they have to make good on it. And because they have not made good on it, because they did not leave on March 29th, which was the first hard deadline, which is also part of British law, now you have a Prime Minister, Theresa May, who is resigning, who has resigned. It's just a matter of time until she's actually gone. And now you have the European Union saying, we're not going to renegotiate anything with Brexit. So now you got to see, well, who's going to become the next Prime Minister of the UK? And what is he or she going to do? Because now you have a list of candidates, which is almost, I think, 11 or 12 candidates at this time. It's almost as crazy as over here with the 23 or 24 lunatics that are running on the Democrat ticket. So now you have a whole bunch of people vying for power. What is going to be their stance? Who do they have to contend with? Will they allow a second referendum to take place? Will this whole thing go up in shambles? Will this be a true collapse of a democratic process in a country which is supposed to be a beacon for democracy around the world? And of course, I'm talking about the United Kingdom. So we have to pay attention to all of this. This is why it's such an important question. This is why it is such an important event. Is the politics of it interesting? Absolutely. Will the economics, the fallout, will that be interesting to follow? Absolutely. But those are secondary and tertiary. The prime point is you have to trust the democratic institutions. You have to keep them intact. And if this collapses, even if you just have a second referendum, that in and of itself is a failure of democracy. This is pretty much people saying you didn't know what you were doing. You didn't know, you did not vote the right way, is basically the arrogance that is coming from politicians right now. The world over. It's here aplenty in the United States. It's in the UK. It's throughout Europe. It's everywhere. Then obviously, if you really want to go over there, you're talking about China. They couldn't care less what the people think. They're ruling with an iron fist. What we say goes. So that's why it's so important to fulfill the wishes and the voice of the British people, whether you like it or not, because that's democracy. That's what you signed up for. So it's a shame, but we're going to keep you posted on what happens. Now, getting to Nigel Farage and his Brexit party, they were able to dominate the vote. And again, this is a party that's only been in existence for 6 weeks. And nevertheless, they won the majority of the vote in the UK. So here's an article from the BBC. We have the Conservatives and Labour parties suffered heavy losses, with the former getting less than 10% of the vote. And you have to remember, the Conservative Party is the dominant party in Parliament right now. That's Theresa May's party. They got hammered. So people are tired of leadership, or the lack thereof, in the UK. This is highly reminiscent all around the world. That's why you have the rise of populism, even in the United States as well. Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage said he was ready to take on the main parties in a general election. Mr. Farage's party won 29 seats. The Liberal Democrats won 16. Labour won 10 seats. The Greens 7. The Tories 4. The SNP 3. And the Plaid Cymru and the DUP 1 each. The elections came after Prime Minister Theresa May tried 3 times to secure MPs' backing for her Brexit plan and announced her resignation after her 4th attempt prompted a backlash. Very interesting indeed. So here's the main points. We have the UK elected 73 members to the European Parliament. Turnout was just below 37%. That is the second highest in any European election in the UK. So obviously people were interested in getting out there and voting this time around because of the failure of what was taking place in the British Parliament, obviously regarding Brexit. The Brexit Party received the highest share of the vote in 9 of the 12 regions, with 32% overall. So it's very interesting here, folks, what is going to take place. How long will the UK remain in the European Union? Because the longer they remain, the longer Nigel Farage and his Eurosceptics and populists are going to be in the European Parliament. This is good television for me as far as I'm concerned. So, I mean, I want the British people to leave ultimately. The sooner the better. And then it'll be interesting to see how the government, the British Parliament, starts to contend and work with the Brexit Party and some others to get a deal done, because a deal needs to be done, because this is a growing movement. People are sick and tired of the political shenanigans. And the Conservatives and the Labour Party both got smacked. They got smacked by fringe parties, fringe elements, and a party that's only been in existence for 6 weeks. That is a complete and utter embarrassment. They are going to do their best to save face. And of course, who takes to Twitter but Prime Minister Theresa May? And she says a very disappointing night for conservatives. Some excellent MEPs, that's members of European Parliament, have lost their seats. Some excellent candidates missed out. But Labour also suffered big losses. It shows the importance of finding a Brexit deal, and I sincerely hope these results focus minds in Parliament. Well, a dollar late. A day late, a dollar short, I should say, for Theresa May. She didn't get it done. Now she wants to take to Twitter to put in her 2 cents. Enough's enough. With all due respect, ma'am. I guess we can say, for the sake of being civil, you tried your best, but unfortunately it was not good enough. I don't know what took place behind the scenes. I don't know if you were bought off or paid off by bigwigs within the European Union. I don't know if you were trying to compromise for compromise's sake. But either way, it was poor leadership, and now you have thrown the country pretty much into haywire because are we going to get a second referendum? What's going to take place in the European Union? How much longer are you going to remain in the EU? Because you were supposed to be gone 2 months ago. You're still there. Now you get a little bit of relief. You can stay in there until Halloween of this year. Of course, that could change. That could change. I hope it doesn't. Hopefully they're gone sooner than that. But you got to have a whole bunch of politics and politicking taking place over the next few weeks, really the course of the next month, until you have a new prime minister. And then what's going to take place? What kind of deal is going to be struck? Because the European Union already said we're done. We're done negotiating. We have other things to deal with. We definitely don't want to deal with Nigel Farage again. We definitely don't want to deal with a whole host of more Nigel Farages here. So just leave. I told you this was going to happen. This is what happens when you don't follow the will of the people. There is backlash. There is more shenanigans. Just leave. Just leave. Now we have an article from the New York Times, and this one starts to talk about Italy, because obviously there's a huge uprising in Euroscepticism as well as populist movements there. And we have Matteo Salvini, a leader in Italy. So Matteo Salvini basked in triumph on Monday after a thumping victory for his far-right League Party in this weekend's European Parliament elections, rendered him the dominant politician in Italy and the strongest claimant to the leadership of Europe's populists. But if Europe has been an incubator for resurgent nationalism in recent years, it now also feels like an active battleground. With Europe's decades-old project of unity increasingly in the balance, the voting energized both sides on a polarized continent. It was a contest between angry, disaffected nationalists who want to beat back what they see as a remote and overreaching bureaucracy in Brussels against the once sleepy, complacent supporters of Europe looking to defend a unity that can no longer be taken for granted. Well, my goodness, isn't that a good way to put it? Disaffected nationalists who want to beat back what they see as a remote and overreaching bureaucracy in Brussels. That's exactly what it is. That is my biggest contention. That is why I am so against it, because these countries are independent nation states. They should act as such. They should be in control of their own political and economic destinies. It should not be chartered for them by a whole bunch of no-faced people who are unknown out of Brussels. Just not how it's supposed to work. Same thing here in the United States. We're not supposed to be chartering our course. All 50 states aren't supposed to be marching to the same beat of a whole bunch of idiots out of Washington, D.C. That's not how it's supposed to work. It's called the United States. United States. It's not the United Government out of Washington, D.C., and then they just dictate from on high how everybody has to go and operate. It's the United States. You got 50 laboratories. This might work here. It might not work there. This might work great down there. It might not work up there. So what? That's the point. Because once you have centralization, once you have everybody operating at the same pace, at the same thing, this is what you get. This is why you have $22 trillion in debt. This is why if you just put blanket statements and blanket policies out there for all 50 states, which are made up of many different people of different cultural beliefs. I mean, people in Mississippi are a lot different than people in Massachusetts. That's just how it is. That's not a bad thing, by the way. That's just reality. So allow the people of Mississippi and Alabama operate how they want to operate, and allow the people of Vermont and New Hampshire and Massachusetts operate how they want to operate. Of course, you have some fundamental baseline rules, but we are beyond that. We are well past that. But let me get off that rant. So here, the New York Times actually put together an interesting, let's just call it a heat map, if you will, of the European Union and sort of break down the share of votes for Eurosceptic parties. Your biggest victors for the Eurosceptics is obviously in Italy, Hungary, and Poland. Some of your secondary countries are Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, and then you have also France, which is interesting because in France you have Marine Le Pen. Her National Rally Party won the highest share of the vote at 23%. So that's going to be very interesting for Emmanuel Macron and company out of France, because if Marine Le Pen should win in this year's, I believe it's this year's election, that's going to uproot, obviously, Emmanuel Macron. He's gone. He's the pretty boy, the darling of the European Union, and he'll be out of the seat. He'll be gone if Marine Le Pen wins, because she would most likely be the one who beats him. She is obviously a Eurosceptic. She is more of a populist. Again, I don't have a problem with this because I have a big problem with the European Union. But get it, if you followed my podcast yesterday, you still have to be careful, because you still have to watch for these cults of personality, because you cannot let them rule with an iron fist either. Just because I'm saying I believe that the Eurozone and the European Union will disintegrate within the next decade and perhaps could be completely obsolete, it's definitely going to be a lot different. It's definitely not going to look like how it looks today. It's going to be a lot different. You cannot have people in Italy or France or anywhere else ruling with an iron fist. That's not how constitutional republics and democratic governments are supposed to work. So despite my joy that there are more Eurosceptics and populists throughout Europe, throughout the European Parliament now, you still have to look at this very cautiously, because you can't just swing the pendulum from one extreme to the other. We talked about this yesterday on the podcast with the cult of personality with Donald Trump. Everything he says and does, you know, if you're a big supporter of Trump, a lot of people in his base, he can do no wrong. Same, and I didn't pick on Trump specifically because I also looked at Barack Obama, because you have to look at the system, the environment from which they arose. And you can't, because there are a whole bunch of people, even to this day, who think President Obama did not make one mistake. Everything he did, touched, said was gold. You have the same people on the other side who are now in Donald Trump's campaign, his base, who love him. Everything he says, does, is gold. It's not true. You have to be very careful, because it can unravel a democratic institution, a democratic government very quickly. But nevertheless, I think the pendulum is swinging in the right direction, at least from this standpoint, within the European Union, saying enough is enough. We want our sovereignty back. We want a bigger say. We want a bigger say in our politics. We want a bigger say in our economy. We don't want all of these rules to come down on us from on high, from a whole bunch of people we don't even know. You don't share our culture. You don't share our heritage. You don't share our country. So that's important stuff. At least here in the United States, everybody is an American. Over there, you're Italian or you're not. It's that simple. I mean, you can say, well, I'm European and this, and that, and the other. That's just not how it works. People are proud to be Greek, Italian, Polish, German, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But you have to be careful on the other side with this populism stuff, because you don't want to have somebody ruling with an iron fist, because that's what they're complaining is taking place from the bureaucracy at the higher levels of the European Union. You don't want that locally either. So it's something to pay attention to. So these are a whole bunch of events that we're going to be very mindful of as we progress here throughout 2019 and 2020, because a lot of these issues are going to obviously continue throughout this year and will roll over into 2020. Brexit will continue to be front and center, unfortunately. I was hoping by this time the only thing that we would really have to deal with would be some of the economic fallout, because there are going to be some bumps along the road. It'll be interesting to see who becomes the next Prime Minister of the UK, how they handle the Brexit situation. It's going to be very interesting to see how the European Union, the upper echelons, contend with a rising group of Eurosceptics and populists now in that body. So buckle up. I told you politics like this is everywhere. It's not just here in the United States. It is global. It is global. And when you have the institutions of democracy, I think in the crosshairs of failure, we really have to start paying attention. And we're going to continue to do that here at the Capital News. Thank you so much for joining me. Please like, share, subscribe, get the word out. Leave your comments. We do love hearing from you. This is the Capital News. I am Alex Kouraitis. Godspeed.